Hello, welcome to Become the Change live hangout. This is a weekly show dedicated to conscious activism and really becoming the change that you wish to see in the world, and using case studies and interviews of people who've already done it. So my name's Sandy Leveque, and I'm the host of this show. I was actually a campaigner and an activist for about 10 years in London, campaigning against inequality and poverty, and then for women's rights. So I actually stopped doing all of that after getting very ill and walked away for a few years. But I've realized recently that, even if you're not campaigning against something, you can stand for something, and you can have a clear vision of the things you would like to see in the world and speak about them. And I know that for me, what helps me do more and more of that is to actually be really aware of people who've already done it. It's like people going up a mountain before you, and you can follow in their footprints rather than having to find it all yourself. So today's amazing person that I'm going to focus on is Helen Keller. You might have heard of her already, you might not have. I know that if you're in America, you probably have heard of her. I'm from Britain, as you might be able to hear, and I have to be honest, I'd seen her sayings and her quotes, but I didn't really know too much about her until I began researching today's show. And researching her has been such an amazing, inspiring experience, because this woman was just incredible. But she had qualities that all of us had. She just had to overcome adversities and situations that not all of us will ever have to encounter. But she did it in such a way, with such grace, that I know you're going to be inspired by the end of this show. So it's going to be quite short, about 30 minutes. If you're in my team and you're watching this, feel free to hop on. You should have the link. If you don't, then please let me know, because I will do what I can to get it to you. Facebook me, that will be the quickest way to tell me. So Helen Keller. And also, if you're watching and you have questions, then feel free to use the Q&A to ask them, okay? I will see it. I have it here open, so I'll see it and I'll be able to answer as best as I can, So, just a disclaimer, I'm not an expert on Helen Keller, but I do know a lot about campaigning, about what it takes to create change. I worked in a campaign that actually changed British law twice, became one of the youngest campaigns managers in the UK, and I know what is required to get things moving, So I just find it fascinating understanding how people have impacted the world, what they did, and so I use this show to really piece apart people's stories, because sometimes we hear someone's story and you think, well, that's amazing, but I'm just plain old me, what could I do? And that's the thing that I would love to challenge, because you, plain old you, can do a hell of a lot. All of us can. In fact, all of us can do probably way more than we think we can, for the very exact reason that a lot of people don't feel very powerful. So when you actually just don't buy into that and you step beyond that, you become very powerful, because you become someone who's not afraid to speak out in the world. I really hope that watching the show, tuning into it, will help you step into more of that, and to know that you can go out and do the things you'd like to do. So Helen Keller. So Helen Keller was actually, she was born just about 120 years ago. She was around at the end of the 1800s, start of the 1900s. Do not check out if you're, I used to do that when people would say things like that, because it seems so long ago. This woman is so relevant to today, it's unbelievable. And so she was actually born very healthy, but what happened was that at 19 months she got a very bad fever, and some people say it would be meningitis today, and it actually left her deaf and blind. Okay, so deaf and blind, basically mute. She wasn't totally mute. She could make noises, and she had already been normal, let's say, but she became a bit of a wild child, and she actually turned into one of the most influential women the world has ever known. Like, quite seriously, she's always on the lists of the most influential women of all time. She was a huge campaigner for the rights of the deaf and the blind, and the deaf-blind. She spoke in over 25 countries on 5 different continents, wrote 12 books, even though she was blind and deaf. And I'm going to go into more of her story, but I just wanted to give you a sample of why you should bother like knowing about this woman, because I have to be honest with you, I didn't know a huge amount about her, but I knew that I wanted to know more of her. And when I started to read her work, and I'm actually going to read her biography too, I just felt so inspired to share her story, and I hope that you'll be inspired to share her story as well, you know, like little seeds. So what happened was that she was like kind of became a wild child after losing her sight and her hearing at the age of 2. She, you know, she couldn't communicate with people, so she would just have tantrums and get really frustrated. And her father actually wanted to send her to a mental institution. Bearing in mind, this woman went on to become one of the most influential women of all time, especially in the last 20th century, and became a massive advocate for the rights of people who have disabilities, and also for women's rights, and met every single American president, and was, you know, Winston Churchill called her one of the greatest women of all time. So this woman was actually facing a mental institution at the age of 6. But luckily, her parents, her mother knew Sir Alexander Bell, the inventor of the telephone, and she spoke to him about Helen, and he, through a contact, he put them in touch with a kind of an institution that helped the families of children who were deaf, blind and mute. And so she came across a woman who was about 20 at the time, who was taken into the home of the Kellers to actually look after Helen. So her name was Anne Sullivan, and she was brought into their home, and she actually became a huge figure in Helen's life, because Anne sort of, you know, took her job way more, you know, to her it was way more than a job. She became Helen's constant companion and helped Helen start to be able to spell, start to be able to write, helped her change her behavior so that she wasn't this wild child, so that she could become someone who people would listen to and take seriously. And she worked with her, and in fact there's a really interesting story, because when she first started working with Helen, she was trying to teach her how to understand words, and she had a doll, and she was getting Helen to touch the doll to realize that it was a doll, a toy, and then she would spell the word doll on Helen's hand. And Helen didn't really get that at the time, but then what happened was that she put water on Helen's hand, and Helen understood at that moment what Anne had been doing all that time, because she didn't quite get it before then, apparently. And so she started to really get that, oh, hang on, the word that this girl is showing me signifies the sensation I'm feeling on my hand of this cool water passing over it. And so they began working like that, and Helen had this voracious appetite for learning more and more words, more and more sentences, and it started a really long relationship that went on for decades. Not a relationship as in a love relationship, but a kind of companionship where Anne, you know, people called her the miracle worker, because she was so patient with Helen, so present with her, and dedicated so much time and attention that Helen was able to learn, you know, so much, just masses of words, masses of vocabulary, and going on to actually write books. And so this is what, you know, this is how Helen's life started. It was not easy. I mean, if you can just imagine right now having no ability to see and no ability to hear. Now, what would that be like? Like, if you really think about it, like, just close your eyes and imagine for a second. That would be extremely challenging for a lot of people. And the amazing thing with Helen is that she actually went on to do all the things I mentioned before, you know, writing 12 books. She was the first deaf and blind person to ever, sorry, she was the first deaf and blind person to ever graduate from college in America. I mean, this girl had determination. And so as I was reading over her story, I picked out 4 things that I think are part of what made her successful, you know, are the real key components of what stood her apart from so many people that in a similar situation might have just given up, you know. And actually, I got the idea for this topic after reading Napoleon Hill's book Think and Grow Rich, where he actually speaks about how Helen Keller, she had this adversity of not being able to hear or to see, and she turned it into a blessing. She turned it into something that gave her power. And I'm going to come back to that in a second. And he talks about how some people with the same exact conditions, and perhaps even better conditions, they become a victim of it, and they'll end up begging on the streets, or just living life in a very unhappy, angry way. And Helen did not choose that. So I've actually picked out these 4 things that you can really sort of take away from her story, because I think it's useful to know how people have gone beyond average and normal, and what helped them do that, what helped them not give up in situations that most people would give up in. Because if you look around us, the overwhelming tendency is to sort of is to give up, is to be kind of normal, to be average. And stories like Helen's are so inspiring, because she definitely wasn't, And so one of the first things, and I'm just going to do a screen share here so that you can see some lovely slides that I prepared, because I think that makes it easier to sort of digest the information. And by the way, just check out this garden here. I love this tree over here. You should see at the end of my fingertips, because it looks like a person to me. It looks like a big gorilla or something. As if a big gorilla had like a layer of leaves on him. So anyway, coming back to Helen, let me just show you my screen. Oh, just got a bit jumpy there from someone opening the window. Okay, so here we go. So this is Helen. This is her in her, obviously, I think she was in her 60s here. So I picked Helen as the case study for today because she's a really good example of a conscious activist. To me, a conscious activist is when you're not fighting against something. You see something and you're working towards it. You're raising awareness, or you're speaking about it, or you're actively contributing to it in some way, and you're actually focusing on what you would like to see happen. So Helen really sort of addressed this, because this is one of the things that she said, was that all the world is full of suffering. It is also full of overcoming. And she says, no pessimist ever discovered the secret of the stars, or sailed to an uncharted land, or opened a new doorway for the human spirit. And I love that, because it's so true. If you're always focusing on the problems, you can never really see anything beyond that. And this is why I actually sort of left campaigning in the end after getting very ill, was I realized that I was always focusing on the problems. I was being a pessimist. And when you start being a visionary, you start to see things. And in fact, this was the first thing that I think we can take away from Helen's story, which we can take away, is that she had a burning desire to change the world. It was a huge desire. And she actually declared after she finished college that she was going to dedicate her life to improving the lives of people in the same situation as her, so people that were deaf and blind, or deaf-blind. And so she actually said, this is one of her most famous quotes, "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision." The only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. Now, how amazing is that when you really look at it? How many people do you know who can see, but they don't really have a vision? They take life as it is. They just kind of they take the status quo, and I think that's fine. But the issue I have with that is that if you don't like the status quo, but you don't do anything about it, it's kind of like, I honestly don't understand that. I just think, why wouldn't you do something about it if you can see that it doesn't have to be like that? Then you're obviously seeing that for a reason. And this is what Helen is sort of speaking to, is that, you can see. She could not see in the physical sense, but she could see other things. And actually, this is what this another quote I found from her really demonstrates. She says, "I can see, and that is why I can be happy in what you call the dark, but which to me is golden. I can see a God-made world, not a man-made world. And so she's speaking to the same thing here. You know, she could see a different kind of world where people in her situation had better rights, had better chances of living a happy life. And so she worked tirelessly towards that. She dedicated her whole life, and that was, you know, it really consumed a lot of her energy and was part of her reason for doing what she did. And she lived a really long life. She lived to the age of 88, and she always had this burning desire to actually make a change, to really contribute something, whatever she could. And, you know, thanks to her, I came across so many organizations that said that they'd started programs for the blind or programs for the deaf because of Helen Keller's work, because of what she did. And so she was part of what enabled her to do that. If you want to replicate this, you don't have to be blind or deaf to do it, you know, at all. You can take what I'm sharing here and apply it to anything, because this is kind of like a well-known component of success, is having a burning desire to do something. You know, if you're half-hearted about it, if you don't really care, you know, it's probably not going to happen. Because it's like trying to drive a car and you're only putting like a tiny bit of petrol in it. You're not putting fire in it. You're not putting a whole tank of fuel and the energy that will get it actually moving to places. So Helen had this burning desire to change the world, and she said the only thing worse than being blind is having sight but no vision. So she was very clear. She had a vision where anyone who was born blind or deaf onto planet Earth, it would not be a problem for them, that there would be sufficient resources for them to be taken care of or to be able to live their lives in an autonomous way. And she never stopped speaking about that, you know, for her whole lifetime. So that was one of the big things that helped her become a world changer, become someone who really impacted the world in a way that lives on today. You know, someone where if you type in motivational quote on Google, you'll usually see one of her quotes, you know. And so a burning desire was one of the things that propelled her beyond where most people are at. The next thing that I picked out from her story was the ability to focus the mind. Because when you read about her, everything she did, and I'll just check that you can still see. Oh, that's my Facebook. Yes, you can. So here she says, while they were saying among themselves, it cannot be done, it was done. And she had a very strong way of focusing the mind. She said on several occasions, I seldom think about my limitations, and they never make me sad. Perhaps there is just a touch of yearning at times, but it is vague, like a breeze among flowers. So how powerful is that, you know? She had what a lot of people would consider to be some of the biggest limitations you can ever imagine, you know, not being able to see or to hear anything. You know, like the basic fundamentals of communication she could not use. Yet she did not think about them. She says here herself, she seldom thought about her limitations, and they never made her sad. Just a touch of yearning sometimes, but it's vague, like a breeze among flowers. And just how amazing is that? Because, you know, I'm sure if you think back to the last couple of weeks in your own life, I bet there's at least one situation where you kind of felt a bit sorry for yourself because of it. You know, I say that because that's exactly what I do. and I'm, you know, becoming more and more conscious of that so that I can stop doing it, because I've realized that you can't play the victim and create an amazing life and impact. You know, you really have to take responsibility for everything you think and you choose. And so she did that really successfully. And she refused to allow her limitations to sort of define her life in a negative way. You know, they did definitely define her life, but they actually gave her a purpose and something that she wanted to help change in the world. And she says here, what I am looking for is not out there, it is in me. What I am looking for is not out there, it is in me. So I think that's really telling, because she knew that she had power within herself, and that she didn't have to just, you know, focus on changing the things out there, she had to also focus on herself. And this is a really good example of, the way that she saw that. So you can listen to that and be like, well, okay, whatever, it's in me, yeah, the power's in me, I know that. Or you can actually look at that and say, well, hang on, this is a woman who met every single American president in her lifetime, who wrote 12 books despite being deaf and blind, who was the first ever deaf and blind person to graduate from college. So this sentence is worth just really looking at it, because if you really get it, I think you'll have some kind of breakthrough, because when you realize that you don't have to just fix things out there, that you can actually fix things in you and start to change the way that you mold your reality, it changes everything. It's a game changer. It's like you become Neo in the Matrix. You realize that you've been living in this sort of box and that you can just sort of step outside of it and do something else. And so what helped her do something else and step outside of it was persistence. And that was the third thing that I picked out. And she says here, we can do anything we want to do if we stick to it long enough. And you've probably heard other people talking about persistence, but I just want to give you some examples from Helen's life, because she's just so inspiring. She, I'll just come back here. She actually, ne pas enregistré. Okay, so she, just coming back. So just to give you a couple of examples of persistence from Helen's life. When she was learning words, the way that she learnt words was extremely laborious. She had to learn each letter. She had to learn each word separately, one by one, as an adult. She started when she was 6 or 7, but that's a lot later than most people start. But she never approached it with this kind of, oh, why do I have to do this perspective. According to her teacher and her companion, the miracle worker, the lady I was mentioning earlier, Anne Sullivan, Helen was really she was like a lion that could never get enough flesh. She was constantly wanting to learn new words, constantly wanting to expand what she knew. She had this never-ending appetite, and she actually went on to learn 5 languages. 5 languages, including English. But isn't that just mind-blowing? Someone who is deaf and blind learning 5 languages. When I heard that, I was just amazed. And so she had a strong sense of persistence, where she didn't just give up. She kept going. And another example of that was with her college degree, because when she applied, she went to Radcliffe College in the States. Radcliffe initially told her not to apply. They didn't want her to come because they didn't see how they could help her. They didn't get that, they didn't know how someone who couldn't see or hear the lecturers could actually do a degree. But Helen did not listen. She persisted, and she insisted on going anyway. She brought with her her companion and her teacher, Anne, and she was the first person to ever finish college. They sat in lectures, and Anne would be literally writing out everything that she was hearing so that Helen could understand. And she would be doing that with books as well. So can you imagine just how much work that would have involved? But they did it. And Helen went on to complete her degree, became the first ever deaf and blind person to graduate from college. Anne was a woman. Let's not forget that this was at a time when women didn't have the vote yet. And she was actually a big supporter of women's suffrage, of women getting the vote. But she did not care. She carried on. She carried on all the time and did not give up. And so, you can really sort of sense that spirit in her when she says here, let's just go back to the slideshow, when she says, as long as you don't give up, you can never fail. And I've lost the actual show. Here we go. If we can do anything we want if we stick to it long enough. And so, something I want to just add to this is that a mentor of mine said recently, sometimes people think persistence means doing the same thing every single day. And in fact, it doesn't mean that. It actually doesn't. It actually means showing up in your life every single day. It doesn't have to mean that you do the exact same actions. It means that you're present you're engaged in your life, and you're not just checking out. Like a lot of people check out of their lives, by excessive drinking or excessive, watching TV or excessive any kind of. I sound like a Puritan right now, but you know what I mean. Like when people are living, but they're not really here. Their mind and their spirit is elsewhere. A lot of people around us do that a lot of the time. I remember working in offices where people would drag their bodies to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. We'd be there till 8 p.m. in the evening. So I worked in the city of London in the UK. And people were gone by about 10 o'clock. They weren't really there anymore. They were sort of doing the bare minimum, but their spirit wasn't really there. I could just feel that. And they would look forward to the weekend all week, where they would just go and get really drunk. And what happens when you're drunk? You're not really, you're kind of like in this crazy parallel universe. So persistence doesn't just mean doing the same stuff all the time, which can sound really boring and feel really boring. It means showing up, making your life count, making every day count, and not just sort of checking out of your own life. And Helen was a beautiful example of that. She learned 5 languages, wrote 12 books, traveled to 25 different countries, wrote, spoke to every American president, did so much. And everywhere she went, she inspired other people who were blind and deaf to realize that there was hope for them. She had a really strong message of hope. And she inspired people to know that even if they had what a lot of people consider to be a really limiting disability, she did not see it that way. She looked at how you could turn it to your advantage, how you could make it work. And she never allowed it to define what she could and couldn't do. So, whether that was learning languages and learning to write, or whether that was going to college, she was persistent. So this is another beautiful quality from Helen, which any of us can apply. And the final point that I wanted to bring out from her life is the mastermind. And if you've read any books by Napoleon Hill, I'm a big fan of his work. He interviewed 500 of the world's most successful entrepreneurs around the time that Helen was an adult. And he found that many of them, most of them, enough that he wrote about it, were in masterminds. They didn't do everything on themselves. And this is the same with Helen. Helen had a companion with her at all times. She obviously sort of needed one because she was deaf and blind, but many people who are in her situation don't have a companion. They don't do what's required to make that happen. They don't nurture it. They don't appreciate it. And or maybe, I'm sure there are probably some situations where they just can't for some reason, but when you look at how Helen started out, being on the verge of going to a mental institution, she still created this in her life and in her reality. And she says here, alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much. And she says as well, when we do the best that we can, we never know what miracle is wrought in our life or in the life of another. And she was a big believer in the fact that that change, whether you're changing the world or changing your own life, that it's easier to do it when you have people around you. Because, it's like that saying, the power of 2 people, where 2 or more are gathered. I'm a big believer in that too. And Helen is a great example because she always had another companion with her, for a long time, the miracle worker, Anne Sullivan, who helped her to learn to write, to learn to be able to communicate. She even helped her, actually, you might not know this, just to be able to do things like eat her meals normally. Because before meeting Anne, Helen was like a wild child. She was driving her family crazy. She would just be shouting and refuse to sit still, and it was just like always like really hard to manage, to put it mildly. And Helen, when Anne came along, she wouldn't let Helen eat unless she sat still and ate her food and didn't like throw stuff around, didn't yell, didn't try and jump around. She sort of instilled some habits in Helen that helped her become someone that people respected and would listen to, rather than someone who was in a mental institution, which, let's face it, a lot of people wouldn't take her as seriously if she had gone there. So she had a mastermind of sorts around her. She later had other companions after Anne actually died. She died way before Helen did. So then she had other companions who were always with her, could help her understand the world around her and express what she had to say. And she liked to say, actually, that writing was something she loved to do. You know, she wrote 12 books because it was a way that she could express herself easily without the kind of, I can imagine, the nuances of verbal communication, which must be so much harder when you can't hear or see anyone. But writing also, you know, would be very difficult because you can't, you know, she had to get someone to transcribe her thoughts. But she still found that easier, and she did it. You know, she actually became someone whose words were written all over the world, and whose word changed the world because it was her speeches, her books, her writings. You know, her books initially came out in, I think it was like Good Housekeeping Journal or something like that, but became a bestseller. Her life story, and so she shared her word, her story, her experiences, and what her vision was, what she could see was possible for the world. And by doing that, she became the change that she wanted to see, and she changed the world. And so you watching this, you know, whether you're watching live or you're watching this in the future, there is no reason why you can't do this too. You know, very often when we hear stories like this, and I'm really kind of aware of it as I'm putting on this show and demonstrating, you know, these amazing case studies, I can feel sometimes that people separate a bit from them because there's like, it's almost like if you're watching a movie about Superman and you feel like that's Superman, but you don't really see yourself as being on the same level, you know? You feel like you're just watching a movie. Like if you came and saw Angelina Jolie tomorrow or Brad Pitt tomorrow, you probably would feel a bit weird, you know? You'd feel like you were somehow subhuman. I think I would probably even do that with them as well, if I'm totally honest with you. But the thing is, we're all the same. We're all, you know, humans, and, you know, maybe some of us are aliens, but there's no reason why we can't do anything that we put our mind to. And Helen is an amazing example of that. You know, she really is. And so, you know, even with the example of celebrities, I remember reading once in a book how, if, you know, it took the example of Nicole Kidman, and it spoke about how Nicole Kidman, and I think this applies to any actor actually, apart from maybe a few exceptionally sort of uniquely attractive people, but, you know, if you look around you, you'll usually see people that are amazingly beautiful, but they're just ordinary people. They're not film stars. And this book that I was reading, it was a French book, they were saying how oftentimes people who become celebrities and film stars, they just see themselves as a film star before they become one. And they kind of have that poise and that confidence and that expectancy it's going to happen. And so it does, you know, but you can't do it before you have that. You know, you have to sort of know that's where you're going and have a burning desire. And that's exactly what Helen had. She dedicated her life to improving the rights of people who couldn't see or hear. And she achieved that. You know, like I said earlier, many programs, initiatives, you know, millions of dollars all over the world were raised for the cause of deaf and blind people because of what she did, because she shared her story and inspired other people to go and share their story. She stepped out. So my question to you now as we wrap up is, what would you like to see in the world? You know, you might not be deaf and blind. You might be thinking, well, Sandy, you know, that's great. I love Helen. I love what she did, but I'm fine. I'm perfectly healthy. You know, who's going to listen to me? I'm not deaf or blind, and I understand that. But what I know also is that there are things that you see. You wouldn't be watching this Hangout otherwise. We would not be connected. You know, there are things that you can see for the world that perhaps other people can't see, and that's what a visionary is. A visionary is someone who sees what is invisible to others, and they make it visible. You know, that's where the word, that's why it comes from visionary. They have a vision and they can make it into physical reality. So what do you see? You know, it might be to do with civil rights, but it might be to do with the earth, with conservation. It could be with the food system. It could be with the health of people. It could be with finances and money. You know, what do you see? And what could you take towards that would help it to become a reality here on planet Earth? I can give you a personal example. Two things that I'm working on. in a conscious way are kindness and money. And you know, I just would love to see a world where there was more kindness between people. And so I began making videos about it, doing random things, random acts of kindness, and just sharing them. And I'm not even quite sure why, just the idea came to me, and I just thought, I know, this is something I want to do. Because it's no good me complaining that there's no kindness in the world unless I'm actually contributing to it and doing something that can help other people have the same desire and the same actual willingness to go out and do it. And I'm not saying that I'm always kind all the time, you know, but I'm just aware that we have massive power, all of us, to effect change. And so when we focus our energy, something starts to happen. So imagine if there was, you know, 80 million people focusing on creating more kindness in the world. What would the world feel like? I reckon it would be different. So, you know, that's just my example. Another thing that I'm working on is financial literacy for young people. And I'm writing a book about this because I don't want to leave this earth until I've done something I feel will contribute to young people growing up without having lack consciousness and poverty consciousness. So what changes would you like to see in the world, and what concrete things could you do to make them happen? It could be raising awareness of them. It could be, you know, becoming a volunteer and contributing your time, or it could be sending money to organizations that are working on those things. You know, there's all kinds of different things you can do. And so if you haven't seen the sheet that I created to help you get more clarity about what you would like to see in the world, then go ahead and click on the link below this video for the blog, and it will give you a downloadable sheet that you can actually get that. And if you would like to become more of the change you'd like to see in the world and to use the internet to help you do that, then get in touch with me on Facebook or on Skype or on Google. You know, we're on the Google Plus Hangout here, because I work with people to help them share their message, share their vision on the internet using the skill of internet marketing. And also in a way that allows them to not be a slave to their business. So that if you want to go out and do activism, or you want to go out and, you know, build massive gardens, that you have the time and the money freedom to do that. So you can ask me for information about that. I'll put a link around this video too. And there will not be a show next week. I'm going to be in America traveling. So it's going to be in 2 weeks' time that I'll be back with some people from my team as well. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you got something out of this. I'd love to know if you did. I'm pretty sure that you did if you were listening, because there is some amazing gold to be taken from Helen's story. And Helen, if your spirit somewhere is listening or watching to this, I hope that I have done you justice, and I thank you so much for having been here. And if that sounded a bit weird, then you know, oh well. I don't really care. So I thank you for having watched, and let's go out and become more of the change that we wish to see in the world, because all of us can. Goodbye. This has been Sandy Leveque. I'll see you next time in 2 weeks' time.